if you ask a question, then people will reach inside their brains and consider things. Think about they meld their minds with yours to engage in kind of a give and take thought process. And I just think that questioning is one of the most powerful tools that we have, but also the best way to form relationships is to show, and not a fake question, but a real, I want to know what you think. There's nothing more powerful than that. If for me asking somebody, I want to know what you think. I want to know what makes you tick. I mean, and I really do want to know that. So that's very, very powerful.
Welcome to episode 51 of the Inner Game of Change podcast, where I focus on exploring the multi-layers of managing and enabling organizational change. I am Ali Jama, and this is the Inner Game of Change podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Lynn Kelly, a distinguished author and thought leader whose career has spanned the diverse worlds of transportation, manufacturing, healthcare, finance, and education. From operational roles to strategic executive leadership positions in Fortune 200 companies, Lynn has established expertise in areas such as continuous improvement, lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, and more. Renowned for her insights in change management, Lynn's ability to demystify complex concepts and provide actionable questions strategies will help any change maker translate change vision into real value. In this episode, Lynn and I talk about Lynn's book, Change Questions, explore the power of questions, and dive deep into the details of questions, intentions, and motives. I am grateful to have Lynn chatting with me today. Well, Lynn, thank you very much for joining me in the Inner Game of Change podcast. Eternally grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today, Lynn, we're going to talk about the power of questioning, or questions actually, in the space of change and communication and why they're important. But before we dive deep into the topic, it will be fantastic for you to share who you are and what you do with my listeners and audience.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today. I had a bit of a non-traditional career. I was a hippie first and played in a band. And then by the time I was 28, then I went back to school full time and worked full time.
Are you still a hippie, Lynn?
Am I still a hippie?
Yeah.
I think that in my heart of hearts, I learned a lot from that life. And I think I still, that's a big part of me, is a lot about community and not having pretenses and empathy, not being super materialistic. I think that did stay with me. Definitely.
Fantastic.
Were you a hippie?
No, but
that was before your time, I think.
No, absolutely not. But I hung out with hippies.
Oh, you hung out with hippies.
Yes, I
you
did.
were
I did
the
a lot in New Zealand. I did a lot, especially in Wellington. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. That's good. Anyway, by 28, I had 2 young children under the age of 3, and my husband had lost his job. So one of us had to start being an adult, right? So I went to school full time and worked full time, and he stayed home with the kids. And I started at a hospital as a secretary. That was my job. And then about 7 years later, I had my master's degree, and I was the chief operating officer of the hospital. So it was a big transition. And then what happened is in the next year, my mother died, my husband's mother died, and my husband's brother died. And suddenly, I got that realization that I had gone to work because I needed to provide stability for my family, but family is the most important thing. And now all I did was work, Yes. So it was a big wake up call. So my husband and I switched roles then. He went back to work, and I went into a PhD program, but it gave me a lot of flexibility. So I got a PhD, became a stats professor, and then was recruited to go to Textron. And I was in Australia and working for a bit at Wollongong, where you are from, I know, or where we are right now. And And anyway, worked all over the world and ended up working for the CEO of Textron, implementing change, wide scale change, 32 different countries in all different capacities, in supply chain engineering, IT, manufacturing, quality. So a lot of challenges and a lot of failures, because nobody wants to hear from this woman who's going to tell them what they're going to do differently.
Yes.
So every time I failed implementing a change, I researched what I needed to do differently. And that's how, I developed this method, or this approach that I call the change questions. And it's my approach to implement change. And I saw kind of the success and sustainment of those changes go from like 30% to over 90%. My last position was, before I left corporate America, I was recruited to go to Union Pacific Railroad and think about what lean manufacturing would look like on a railroad, with the operating department, which was 42,000 employees that pretty much hardly ever see a supervisor and are hardly ever under a roof. They're not.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it was a really challenging environment, and we were able to really do some great work there. And I always measure, because I'm a statistician. What is the success? How do we sustain? And we counted a 96% success rate and a strong correlation with operating results with all the stuff that we did. So that really forms the basis of my career and pretty much my life.
You're still doing it, and fantastic story. And you've written a digital book and a guide around change questions. But before we just touch on that, you keep referring to the questioning methodology as a framework. Can you shed light on this?
Yeah, absolutely. If we're talking about change, nobody wants to be told what to do. I mean, how many? Yes. I know if somebody tells me what to do, my first reaction is to reject it, just because it may be the right thing. I just don't want someone telling me what I need to be doing. And, I've learned over the years to be much more open to feedback and people telling me things, because often it's really good stuff, right? But it's the way that I've come to the conclusion that you can, especially with organizational change, you can have the best solution, the most perfect solution. And if you don't get the hearts and the minds of the people, it's going to fail. And the way that I have found to engage people in their hearts and minds is to approach with a humble leadership type of capacity, but with asking questions and learning, because nobody knows their jobs better than the people that do them. And nobody knows where they can improve but the people that do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. The change questions, what is the power of questions anyway?
In general,
yes,
the power of questions makes people that you're ask the question to reach inside and consider what you're asking. So if you're asking them a question about something that maybe could be done differently, if you just tell them what to do differently, and they may automatically reject. But if you ask a question, then people will reach inside their brains and consider things. Think about they meld their minds with yours to engage in kind of a give and take thought process. And I just think that questioning is one of the most powerful tools that we have, but also the best way to form relationships is to show, and not a fake question, but a real, I want to know what you think. There's nothing more powerful than that. If for me asking somebody, I want to know what you think. I want to know what makes you tick. I mean, and I really do want to know that. So that's very, very powerful.
Yeah, you mentioned that you got to have to be genuine in your approach. You got to have a high level of curiosity.
Exactly.
The way I look at it, Lynn, as well, is that the moment I start being interested in answers, I actually go beyond myself and focus on the audience rather than focusing on my preconceived ideas. Does that happen to you?
Agreed. Yeah, I love that. Agreed. 100%.
Yeah. It's like coaching. Effective coaches are the ones that ask the right questions. They actually don't tell you what to do. They can make suggestions, but that's based on the answers you provided, and provided you are actually open to listening to suggestions as well. Asking questions in the field of change management How is that relevant and how is that critical in most situations?
Well, so for me, every time I failed to be successful in a certain change, I did truly research. So I've probably read every single change methodology out there, every approach to change. And I think they are all excellent. I mean, I stole shamelessly from everybody. The thing that I have done differently with my approach is rather than having kind of a set, do this, or like a model or an eight step framework. What I've done instead is, out of all of the lessons that I've learned, I've created 11 questions. And those 11 questions pretty much cover everything that's out there that I could find that's meaningful, about change success factors and failure modes. And so what I think, the way I approach it is, no two changes are the same. So although a set methodology is helpful, if you follow every step, you may over process, maybe over plan for your change, or maybe there's a step missing and you under plan. Instead, if you ask yourself or your people, your leadership, or whoever is implementing the change, these questions or these types of questions, then you end up answering the ones that are applicable for you. And what I found is I can develop a customized approach for every change that I implement or anybody implements just by asking the questions, and the ones that are appropriate, I answer, or the team answers or leadership answers. So I find that it is a good way to, with such high failure rates of change, organizational change in general, it's a good way to really increase the probability that whatever you're putting the energy into to change will engage the people. And some of those questions are actually asked to the people who are doing the work. So there's a whole of these 11 questions, some of them are for leadership, some are for the people doing work, some are for the team, some are for yourself. But eventually you end up knowing the best way to approach your change.
Yes. And I want to add to this, Lynn, that nowadays organizations are mature in the way they expect change to happen. And therefore they expect different things from change practitioners now.
Yes.
The majority of organizations, they've got smart leaders, they know the frameworks, they've seen them, some of them even have finished, completed a certificate in them or whatever it is.
Right.
And so when a change practitioner nowadays, I'm talking here about how we need to evolve their change practice. They expect that a cookie cutter approach is not going to work. I need you to show me that you're looking at my organization as a unique organization, and not just because you've done it in the past and it worked. And even if I am an organization within the same industry, I am still unique as an organization. So no two supermarket chains are the same. What would be your comment on this?
That is one of the keys to asking the questions is the fact that you really can be more successful in engaging people if you really tailor the approach to the change itself. And you don't do too much, but it's kind of like the Goldilocks and Three Bears. It's just amount of planning and things that you want to put in place before you start the change. You get that just amount of preparation so that it will go forward and prosper and continue to sustain.
Yes. Then asking the right questions is an art by itself. How do I cultivate that? Apart from that, I need to be inherently curious person, genuinely curious, let's just call it that.
Right.
How do I cultivate the art of asking the right questions?
I think it takes practice. I found early in my career, I was not good at asking questions. Well, then when I was running a hospital, I was like, oh, okay, everybody wears a suit and a tie. This is very buttoned down. I'm dealing with physicians. Everybody's so well educated. And I felt this need to prove that I was at the level that I should be. And so I overcompensated by pretending that I knew stuff and not asking, and not, if I didn't know how a process worked, and I thought it needed to be improved, instead of saying, show me what you do. I would really love to learn that. And do you do this? And how could this be improved? I would think that for myself, to be viewed as a successful leader, I had to go in with a solution. And that is one of the first mistakes that I had to correct, that I am, maybe some people expect leaders to know it all, but I have found that when I look at leaders that I respect, they are the ones that show that they don't know it all, because nobody knows it all. And that they're willing to ask the questions. So it does take curiosity, as you said, but I also think it takes a humbleness and also a self-confidence that I don't have to appear like I know everything.
Yes. And done rightly, I also, from my experience, Lynn, done rightly, a question is an invitation for both parties to explore options and
yes,
and look at better ways to understand and process information. Sometimes I do see, though, that people ask questions, but they are like a machine gun, tell me this, and that can be raising the threat level to the other person. So the way I look at it is, building a relationship important before asking questions, or any slight level of trust, at least, knowing the purpose of the conversation before I bombard somebody with the questions.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm disappointed I didn't bring it up myself, because that is so profound and critical. There is such thing as the gotcha question. I want to show you how smart I am by asking a question for which I am looking for the right answer. And I'm just asking you that just to test you. And so when I was at Textron, I will never forget this. There were a few folks that had come into the company from the outside, and they were leading our department. And they brand new, came in, about 3 of them at the top leadership roles of our business unit. And their deal was, when you presented, it was all a got you. It's, you just had to survive the questions that were out to get you. And that was the key, to learn how to survive. But then also what I found happening is that many people then started to imitate that, because that's what those 3 leaders had demonstrated was the skill that they wanted people to have, and that they all shared that skill, and they were successful. And so I will never forget, I had someone presenting to me, and I just tried a gotcha question, and this person just deflated in front of me. And, the person was so excited about this project that they had done. And there was one area that I saw was not done to maybe the same standards, but the results were amazing. And instead of focusing on like the positive stuff, I asked the gotcha question. And when I saw he deflated and I saw that I really had ruined that opportunity. And I said to myself then, no matter what a leader does with those types of questions, I will never be a part of that. And if that keeps me from being successful, so be it. But I'm not gonna do that. And so I do think you're right. There are 2 types of questions. The one that is just to show others how smart you are and to catch others out. And then the other one that you really want to know. You really care about the person and you want to understand.
Yes, and completely agree, because the change by itself is difficult, and you don't want to add another layer of difficulty on top of that to create tension and raise the threat level and all of those things. So we're going to have to be mindful of that, because I've already been questioned many times by people, and I can see it. First of all, I can see that they're trying to trip me. And a second thing, sometimes I see that they're not really interested in the answer anyway. They're just asking
That's right.
for the question's sake. And this is why I really emphasize on the word be genuine about it. I'm genuinely interested in the information, so I can take that information, analyze it, and that information becomes insight for me. And that insight will help me facilitate and build my change plans. Is that the approach?
Yes. And in fact, what's so good about this conversation for me is I'm now getting a bit of self-discovery and reflection, because I've gotten so used to in the very end of my career functioning along with the change questions that really are all about, generally wanting to know, that I have forgotten some of the lessons that I had learned. Because another thing that I would do that I think is people do often, when I first learned that I need to start asking questions, I started asking, like if with my direct reports, I would often be very straightforward. I think we need to do this, or let's do this. Or I kind of tell people which direction we're heading. And again, I thought that was more a leadership thing. And then I started it when I first started practicing asking questions, I would know what I wanted them to get to. I would already had decided this is what I want to do with this department. So the questions that I asked them was about getting them to my decision,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Rather than, and people are smart. They know that.
Yeah.
And, fortunately I had a good team, and I had said to them, look, I'm really working hard on not being so, telling you what I want to have happen, but be more inclusive and understanding and, asking for your feedback. So they knew that I was working on it. And then they started saying to me, Lynn, you're asking questions, but you're still doing the same thing. You're trying to get us to the answer you want us to have.
Yes.
So again, I mean, for me, it took a lot of practice. It wasn't I was not naturally comfortable in asking questions. But what's so amazing about this whole thing, and you've helped me see this, Aaliyah, I'm so grateful to you, is how far I came, because I had completely forgotten some of those ways that I functioned before I got to the point, which for the last 20 years, I've been using these change questions. And once I got to the point where it became natural, I forgot that I struggled, and it's a tough time initially.
You probably forgot about it, Lynn, but I'm sure you practice it now subconsciously. So I've got no doubt about that. I also think the power of questions help those people who really find it very hard to articulate their thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. And also knowing that people process differently. And one of the ahas for me is that some people process when they're processing their thought when they're talking, and other people have to process completely before they say their thoughts. So giving people the time, and not trying to answer the question for them, and giving them the time to process if they're that type of person. But then also somebody who's processing as they're talking, understanding that sometimes what they're saying, because they're processing at the same time, may still be a hypothesis. So, understanding how people, we talked about the psychiatry or psychology of change, and all of this blends together, because the way people actually process ideas is different from person to person. And when we become really good at understanding how to ask questions, we also have to understand how they're perhaps processing their answers. And so it's not so simple.
Wonderful.
It can be to get started. You don't want to make it sound daunting, but it's not. The more you start to ask questions, the more you learn. It's not so simple.
Yes, it's not so simple. I want to ask you about, first of all, I know that you need to tailor questions to the type of stakeholder. If they are a senior stakeholder, and the type of questions are actually different from if you're talking to the directly impacted person when it comes to process or whatever it is. Because I often see that and I cringe, but then I might be wrong. I mean, most of the time I'm wrong, probably. And is there a difference between a verbal session of asking questions than a written approach? Because sometimes I find people sending a list of questions to a stakeholder and say, answer those questions.
Oh yeah, there's such a difference. And my PhD was in evaluation and research. So it was the stats part, which is what my dissertation was on.
Yes.
But also we were taught by anthropologists to understand the qualitative aspect of data gathering. And the least rich way to gather feedback and data qualitative feedback and data is to do a written question, because, a lot of most of the meaning of the way that people answer questions is in the tone of voice. That's what you can say same. You can say the same sentence 5 different times with the different tone of voice. It could have 5 different meanings. Like, are you late? Are you late? You can answer, are you late? You can say it so many ways, and it can have different meanings. So, the fastest way to get answers to your questions, if they're qualitative, is through writing. And often, that's if you're miles apart or whatever, and you can't do Zoom, that's most efficient. But it's also the least, comprehensive, or you lose the nuances, and sometimes nuances are meaningful. I'm not downgrading the written answers to questions, because if you're doing a survey of 10,000 people and you don't know any of them, you don't have a choice.
Yes,
but there are, if you have the opportunity, and the next thing is observation, watching people in their environment and asking questions about what they're doing. And, there's a whole level of richness to data, but the richer the data, the smaller the sample size. So you give up things when you try to get for a true rich conversation. So it's a balancing act. I actually like to balance when I'm gathering data, quantitative Likert scale, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or multiple choice. I like to do a balance between that and some qualitative stuff.
The same here. Although I am guilty of avoiding that if I can, but I do find face-to-face or even online, there's a side effect for that. There's unintended positive consequence, which is whether we like it or not, we immediately build a level of relationship when we have a conversation with somebody. And that is an invaluable asset for you in the future, because the aim of questioning is not just to gather information, it's actually to build the relationships with the stakeholders.
That's right. But you also mentioned something about the positive aspect, but there's also, you've got to be careful, because there's the unintended bias of, if you connect with somebody face to face, or you like the way that they dress or the way they look, you could give more weight to their answers than somebody that you took a dislike to, or there's all
the nuances, of human.
There's positive and negative, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know what I used to do when I used to do surveys is I would, if it involved things that would involve that where I needed opinions, which normally that's qualitative data in terms of background, motivations, all of that's, would be qualitative. I would try to get a group together, or do a bunch of interviews, or do a focus group. And then, depending on all those answers, I would try to do multiple choice questions based on those answers, but I'd always leave a place for an other, and then they could fill in a line of a sentence, and that sometimes bridges the gap a little bit better too, if you have to do a big group of people.
Fantastic. I want to shift gear, Lynn, and then talk about who asks the questions. Is that a consideration that we need to look at when it comes to change management?
Yes, it is. Well, at least for the questions that I envision. And so what I've done in the book is recommended who could be involved in developing the questions.
Yes.
Because the answers to the questions and then who could be involved in actually answering them. So some of them are targeted to leadership, and the way that I have often dealt with leadership in the way that you ask leadership is, I don't know if you're familiar with the catch-ball approach, but
no.
Okay. So for instance, let me give you one of the change questions. One of them is, how can leadership visibly show support for the change initiative? So if I'm with a change team and we're going to implement a big change across the organization that the top leadership said they're in favor of, but maybe other leaders in the organization aren't, then what I would end up doing is catchball can either start with me and the team putting ideas together of how leadership could show that they are visibly in favor of the change. And that comes from the whole research that shows that one of the top 2 reasons that change initiatives fail it's not worded that leadership doesn't support it. It's worded that leadership does not show visible support of the change.
Yes.
So given that, we've taken that research and turned it into a change question, then I would either go to leadership and start the catchball by asking them the question, hey, how do you think that you could visibly show support for this change? And they might say things, well, I could ask for updates, or regularly, or I could walk the floor every day where the change is taking place and saying, hey, is it working? Or I could actively try to remove barriers and roadblocks from having to be effective. And people could see me doing that. I mean, they could have ideas. And then with the catchball, what that means is they would throw the ball back to me with those ideas. I'd then take those with other leadership and other ideas. And then I'd throw the ball back to maybe all the leaders who participated and said, this was what we heard from all of you. Do you all agree that you will sign up for this? And have this whole catchball conversation that I don't go to leaders and say, hey, you need to do this to show support of the change. I create a kind of a flow. I tend to take that approach with leadership. I tend to, if it's the employees where the change is going to take place, I will go to the workplace, or the team and I will go, or someone on the team will go to the workplace, and we'll ask, we'll talk about this potential new change, and we'll say, I want to get your ideas on it and show me how you do the work now, and show me what would be done differently, and how do you think this would work, and what would be the problems be. So with them, I'm more just really trying to dig into the whole context around where the actual work that is changing will take place. So it's two different types of things. And there, of course, I said there are 11 of them, and they're all kind of for different types of purposes and groups.
I'm going to use all of your questions in my practice, Lynn. They've been very helpful for me. We are coming close to the end of the podcast. Thoroughly enjoying this conversation. Lynn, I usually ask my guests one last question. What would be the 3 takeaways you would like the listeners to walk away with?
That change is hard, and the research shows that organizational change fails more than it succeeds. So the way to beat the odds that I have found is to ask questions. I would say the second takeaway is ask them humbly, with curiosity, and a genuine wanting to learn what they have to say. And then the third thing that we didn't talk about, but it's a different form of questioning. And it is, before we introduce change globally, like a peanut butter spread to everybody, I really like to ask a big scale change of where can we try this out? And how can we get the bugs out before everybody goes through it? And how can we think about this on a micro level, if possible, before the whole organization gets it? And so that's like a smaller type of change. It's just, let's try this in a place. Can we do that? So those are the 3 those are the things that I found really help with success.
I love them. And your last point is dream big, but start small. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Or fail small and fast.
Yes, yeah.
Both.
Well, try not to fail if you can. Yeah. So, thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I am grateful for your time, Lynn. How would people get hold of you and reach out to you and connect with you?
Definitely. So the one thing that I didn't mention, I'd love for your audience to know, is the change questions are available at no cost in a fillable PDF that you can answer them with remote teams. You can use them in big groups. And that's all downloadable at changequestions.net. And they can reach me through changequestions.net. There's a place where they can send me an email. And then the book itself is available on Amazon in print, Kindle, and audiobook.
And we're going to put all your information, Lynn, in the podcast information. I definitely downloaded your book and I read it. And then I'm using, there are some new things that I'm using, and there are some things that validated my way of thinking. So thank you for the contribution. Lynn, we are coming to the end of the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you at the Inner Game of Change podcast with me. I hope to get you back in the future and tackle another topic. Certainly, we're talking about a big topic when it comes to the art and the power of questioning. But until next time, stay well and stay safe.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you, Lynn. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. To know more about my guests and this podcast, check the innergameofchange.com.au website and remember to subscribe. I can't wait to share with you my next podcast. Until then, stay well and stay safe.
Thank you. You do a good job.
Did I pass the questioning standards?
No, you did. You passed the questioning standard. Yes.